There's a moment in Lonergan's project where everything tightens. Up to now, we've been moving through structure, the structure of knowing, the structure of objectivity, the structure of metaphysical method. But now we arrive at the elements, which are not abstract ideas floating above reality, but the basic components of what is real, as known through the structure of knowing. And Lonergan names them in a familiar way: potency, form, act. But if you're expecting Aristotle repeated, you're going to miss the point, because Lonergan is not borrowing these terms, he's deriving them from the structure of knowing itself. Let's begin with the basic claim. Metaphysics is the integral heuristic structure of proportionate being. That means it anticipates the structure of reality as it would be fully known, not by guessing, but by asking. By asking, if knowing has a structure, experience, understanding, and judgment, what must be the structure of the known? And Lonergan's answer is precise. There are 3 levels of knowing, so there are 3 components in what is known: potency, form, and act. So let's define what those mean. Potency is what is known through experience, but not just any experience. It is what is given in what Lonergan calls the empirical residue, the concrete, the individual, the continuous, the coincidental, the part of reality that is there but not yet understood. Form is what is known through understanding, not through naming, not through relating things to us, but through grasping how things relate to one another. The intelligible structure, the pattern, the law. Act is what is known through judgment. It is the affirmation, the yes, the moment when what is understood is affirmed as real. It is. Now, here's the crucial point. These are not 3 things. They are 3 components of one and the same being. Because what you experience is what you understand, and what you understand is what you affirm. There are not 3 objects. There is one known, but it is known through 3 levels. So potency, form, and act are not separate entities. They are the structure of reality as proportionate to our knowing. This is where Lonergan departs decisively from the tradition. Aristotle often used descriptive knowledge. Lonergan insists on explanation. So potency, form, and act are not derived from how things appear. They are derived from how things are known when fully explained. Now, we need to make a distinction, because there are not just 3 elements, there are actually 6. Central potency, form, and act, and conjugate potency, form, and act. Let's begin with the easier one, conjugate forms. These arise in science. When science discovers laws or correlations or functions, it defines terms implicitly: mass, energy, charge. These are not things you see. They are defined through their relations. So conjugate forms are explanatory terms, and they always come with correspondence, potency, and act. The data they operate on, that's conjugate potency. The events they generate, that is conjugate act. Now, let's contrast that with something else, a concrete thing. Let's say this organism, this person, this unity. This is not defined by abstract relations. It is grasped as a concrete, intelligible unity. Lonergan calls that central form. And this is decisive, because without this notion of unity, science collapses. If there were no stable this that persists through change, no unity across different data, then there would be nothing to explain. No continuity, no identity, no development. What does that mean? It means we need both. Conjugate forms are explanatory relations. Central forms, concrete unities. And because forms differ, so do potency and act. Central act is existence. It is that a thing is. Conjugate act is occurrence. It is what happens. Central potency is the individuality of the empirical residue, and conjugate potency is the spatio-temporal field in which events occur. So, now we have 6 elements. Central potency form an act, and conjugate potency form an act. And they are not arbitrary. They arise necessarily from the structure of knowing. So, now we can actually take a step further, because Lonergan is not just describing static structure. He is describing development, meaning reality is not fixed. It is dynamic. And that dynamism has a structure. Lonergan calls this finality. Finality is the directed dynamism of being. So not a mystical pull, not a future cause acting backwards, but the fact that reality is a process, incomplete, becoming. And here is the parallel. Just as knowing moves from question to insight to judgment, so reality moves from potency to form to act. Potency is what is not yet. Form is what organizes. Act is what is realized. And then, crucially, act gives rise to new potency, and the process continues. So, what does that mean for metaphysics? This is not some sort of static metaphysics. It's a process metaphysics, but not in the vague sense, in a very structured sense. Lonergan, he describes this process in terms of emergence. Lower level events form a coincidental manifold. Then a higher integration emerges, a new form. That organizes that manifold. This happens again and again and again. Chemical processes to biological organisms, neural processes to consciousness, data, insight, knowledge. Each time a higher level integrates, sublates the lower. And this leads to a powerful idea. There are explanatory genera and species, not based on how things look, but on how they are understood. Different levels of explanation, different sciences, different orders of reality. Think physics, chemistry, biology, psychology. Each has its own conjugate forms. Each has its own laws, its own domain. And they are not just reducible to one another, because each represents a higher integration. It sublates the lower levels. Now here's the key insight. These levels are related by higher viewpoints. Just like in knowing, arithmetic to algebra, observation to theory, data to explanation, so in being also, lower levels to higher integrations. This is what allows Lonergan to unify science. That is, without reducing everything to physics, without appealing to vague holism, without invoking mysterious forces. But that being said, we need to address some limitations, because not everything is possible. Reality is constrained, and that constraint comes from potency. Lonergan introduces a powerful idea here: prime potency, the lowest level potency, the ground of limitation. Everything is limited by what it is made from. Judgment is limited by understanding. Understanding is limited by the data of experience. Act is limited by form. Form is limited by potency. So, potency is not just possibility, it is limitation. But there is a paradox, and here's the paradox. It is also the ground of transcendence, because what is limited is also what can be surpassed. And this is why potency is a tension. between what is and what could be. Now, let's return to finality. Finality is not just dynamism, it is directed dynamism. Reality is not random, but neither is it predetermined. So what does that mean? It is effectively probable. Given enough time and conditions, possibilities become actual. And this applies everywhere. It applies in physics, in biology, in human development. And this brings us to the deepest point in this part of Lonergan's thought. That is, there is a parallel. There is a parallel between the dynamism of knowing and the dynamism of being. Knowing is the becoming known of being. Being is the becoming of proportionate being. And because knowing is part of the universe, obviously, this is not two processes. It is one. This is what Lonergan calls finality. That is, the universe striving toward fuller realization, and the mind participating in that striving consciously. Now, let's try to bring all that down to the human level. Human development, we know, is not simple. It is actually triply compounded, organic, psychic, intellectual. Each of these levels builds on the previous one. Each has its own laws. Each has its own integration. But they are not separate, they are unified. And obviously, as we mentioned, development is not linear. It's flexible, it's layered, and it's filled with tensions. Lonergan actually, concerning development and its nonlinear nature, gives us a law, it gives us a number of laws of development: emergence, correspondence, finality, integration, limitation, and transcendence, and finally genuineness. So let's take one, the law of integration. You can change one level, yes, but unless the others adjust, what happens? The development fails. You can have intellectual insight, but without emotional integration, it collapses. You can have emotional growth, but without understanding, it misfires. So, what does that mean for development? It means that development cannot be partial and sustain itself. It is total. Now, let's take the hardest law. That is limitation and transcendence. You are what you are. Okay. But you are also what you are not yet. There's always something in reserve and surplus. And development requires moving beyond yourself. But that movement is resisted. We all know this. It's resisted by things like habit, by our fears, or even by inertia. And so what does that mean for development? Well, development becomes tension between who you are and who you could be. I think most of us have felt this tension. But this tension is unavoidable because you cannot stop knowing and you cannot stop being. Now, that's probably the hardest law, but let's move to the final law. That is genuineness. So, what does it mean, genuineness? It's not simplicity. It's not naivete. And it's also not like introspection curved in on itself alone. Genuineness is the alignment. It is the alignment between your conscious understanding and your actual development. When those two things diverge, what you get is distortion. You get things like bias or self-deception. That's what happens when they diverge. But what happens if they converge? When they align? Well, when these two things align, development becomes possible. And that brings us to the final synthesis. So, potency, form, act, recolor terms, central and conjugate, development, finality. These important Lonerganian terms here for this chapter. These, although they may seem like abstract categories, are not. They are not abstract categories. They are the structure of reality as known through the structure of knowing. And that is the thesis of episode 15. The structure of knowing mirrors the structure of proportionate being. And metaphysics is the articulation of that very structure. In our next episode, we will push further from elements to full metaphysical integration. That is, from structure to system. So, if this helped, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. Because at this point, we are not just learning metaphysics, we are learning how reality becomes intelligible.